everybody, my name is Tabea Tietz from FITS Karlsruhe. I'm in the Information Service Engineering team with Harald Sack and Jörg Weitelohnes, and I was asked to introduce the Ontology Development Kit today a little bit, as I've also done it in our group already, and Jörg thought it would be nice to do the same here as well. A little bit of background on me and where I'm coming from. I'm not in material science or anything like that. I work mostly in NFDI for culture, and I'm currently the main responsible person for the culture ontology, CTO. I'm also supporting the development of the NFDI for memory ontology, MIMO, and I've also been involved in the NFDI core ontology development. So the kind of the examples that I'm working with today stem also from the culture and core ontology mostly, just that you know where I'm coming from and what my background is exactly. So let's start talking about ODK. So another disclaimer is that, Philip, I'm so glad you're here, because a lot of this presentation is also inspired by your presentation that you gave in, I think, 2023. And that was really wonderful, and I kind of wanted to build upon that. And if I'm saying something that is wrong or you want to add something, please just jump in. I think we can keep this very relaxed, and since you're, I think, much more an expert in ODK, please just say something if you feel like adding something. But why do we even need ODK? We asked ourselves, also in the team, when we started developing ontologies, how do we get terms from existing ontologies to reuse them, but we don't want to bloat our own ontologies, and we don't want to lose the constraints and the axioms, and how can we also make sure that the imported ontologies are up to date and fit to the OWL profile that we use? How do we make sure that we don't break anything or forget anything when we edit the ontology? And how can we ensure that users can also access the ontology in a standardized manner, in a way that you can come to my Git repository and immediately know your way around? How can we also manage ontology releases, and how can we automate workflows that deal with quality checking, releases, and imports? How can we create a smooth editing process, in summary, also with multiple developers at once? And we came to using the Ontology Development Kit as a hint from Philip in one of the NFDI working groups, and we're very happy for that tip that we got there, because while I feel like our ontology development process kind of looked like this before, where we were like, oh no, we have to create an ontology, and how do we find out that some definitions are missing, or how can we handle all of the versioning and so on? Now it looks a little bit more like this, because this helps us with the imports, helps us to follow best practices and detect inconsistencies as well. So ODK is an open source toolkit and ontology lifecycle management system for a standardized and transparent development process. The automation that I refer to refers to the import and the release management, consistency checking, reasoning, and also the quality assurance, and helps us to comply to the best practices in ontology development. ODK enables a modularized approach with very clearly separable components. I will also talk about this later, and uses technologies like Robot, Docker, and GitHub Actions. And very nice also is a community-based tool where we also have regular updates. What the Ontology Development Kit is not, and this is also what I've been asked before, it's not a replacement for Protégé. So it's not like we are using the ODK now instead of Protégé. It's they're complementing each other. Okay, But let's talk about setting up ODK. And I've been informed that last week that there was a presentation about the seed script and so on. So I will not go into a lot of detail here, and we'll kind of just skim through it, because I'm assuming that last week, please tell me if I'm wrong, you already got a lot of detailed information about that. The prerequisites are very simply Docker and GitHub, and the steps to create your ODK instance are also very simple. First, you create the parent directory, you start Docker, you download the seed script and give it the rights to also to run it. And then you pull the latest Docker image, run the seed script with the appropriate ontology name, and then check and figure the general metadata in the most important YAML file, and then you create the Git repository and push it. So the first steps are actually very, very simple. And very briefly, I will now go into these general metadata and this YAML file. So you can see that here on the right, where in the beginning you determine the ID, a title, the GitHub organization and repository name. So that's very straightforward. The next thing that you can see here are the release artifacts and the export formats. So the release artifacts you can also configure by yourself, and you can say what should be part of the full release artifact. That's usually, or how we do it, it's the entire ontology with all of the imports, all of the axioms and so on. And then, for example, base could be something like just the classes that you define yourself without the reused ontologies, for example. And the export formats you can also define as you need them. This example is CTO. Here I just added OBO to complete this, but we only use OWL and Turtle, for example. The next thing is the imports. And this is a very central part of ODK that we interact with a lot. And here you can, if you use OBO ontologies, you can it's sufficient to just put the ID here, for example, for the relation ontology. If you're going to import some external ontologies like schema.org, then you have to provide the exact locations. And I will show later on in a bit more detail how this import works. And last but not least, we have to do some further configurations. Here we can determine how much memory robot is allowed to use to consume. And we can also say that this report on, that means just we have this profile txt where we can say, oh, this violation throws an error or a warning, and we can here determine that this fails on error, for example. And this reports on the edit file, which I will talk about a bit later as well. There's also a configuration schema page where this is explained in much further detail, and there are a lot of further things that you can configure here. Okay, and once you have set everything up, which is a very easy, straightforward process, then you have in front of yourself the ODK, the workspace overview. You have here some documentation, you have a source directory, and then here are these release artifacts that we have already talked about. Concerning the documentation, this is very nice with ODK. So ODK provides a built-in documentation, and every repository comes with this pre-configured documentation powered by mkdocs. This is very neat. So you can simply use Markdown to extend this and add further descriptions modeling patterns, and so on. It's very easy to publish, for example, with GitHub Pages. And it also comes with a kind of documentation skeleton. So you have the general ODK workflow documentations, how to build it, how to release, how to manage the imports. And then you can extend the mkdoc site on your own as intended and as you would like. And this is very nice. ODK also comes with the possibility to very easily also publish this Vidoku, this generated Vidoku documentation, and this is also very nice. But we all know that it's better to have a more detailed, more in-depth documentation about modeling patterns and so on. So ODK provides both, which is very, very neat. And then we move on to the source directory, where we have the metadata, the scripts, Sparkle, and ontology directories. Metadata is especially useful if you would like to submit your ontology to the OBO Foundry. And we will now look mostly at the ontology folder, where we have the edit files, reports, imports, and so on. Okay, so in the ontology directory, you can find this ODK YAML file, which is in our case here the CTO ODK YAML file. And this is the main configuration file, which is handling the imports, release artifacts, and so on. And basically everything starts with this YAML file. And when you run the update repo, then this YAML file is used as a source to update basically the entire repository. This overrides the make file, this can regenerate the imports, can regenerate GitHub action files, and the profile txt, for example. And another thing that we find in this directory are the make files. And if you are a developer for 10 years, 20 years, whatever, then you probably already know what make files are. For me, I came into this, I'm not a software developer at heart, so I wasn't too familiar with it at first. So we have two makefiles here. One is a global makefile and one specific to our ontology CTO. And this global makefile is always overwritten and should never be edited manually. And for custom changes, for example, for imports or release infos, we should use the ontology makefile. But I always found also that it's nice to actually go to this makefile, to the global one, to check if everything is working out and if your processes have worked as intended. And you will find a lot of very helpful information there. Further on, we have the ID ranges OWL file, which you can see here. And this determines the ID ranges for each user who works on the ontology for the active ontology development process. You can see this here. And when you open Protégé and actually work on the ontology, then you can select your user basically, or you can also directly connect this with your GitHub account, and then this works automatically. Another useful thing is the profile txt that you find here. And this is some configuration for the robot quality control process. And this defines these tests and checks that should be applied to the ontology during the development phases and the testing phases. But the requirement for this is that you allow this custom profile here. Otherwise, if this is not set, then this profile txt will be overwritten. Exactly. And what I personally found quite helpful was to set a lot of these violations as warn during the early stages of the ontology development process, and then later on, close to the release, set most of them to error to enable a better flow in the process. And then we have here the CTO edit owl in this case, and this is the actual editing file, and the editing in Protege takes actually place here. Exactly. And another very useful file is this catalog XML. Again, if you have a lot of experience in software and web development, you already know what this is, but for those who are not, so this catalog file is important for the import process because a lot of ontology tools, for example, Protege, tend to fetch the imported ontologies over the web, but this catalog kind of overrides this and points them to the local files that we have determined here. This is good for consistency because then everyone who is using the repository will also import the same snapshot of dependencies. And this also ensures that the builds don't break, for example, if some external ontology is temporarily not available. Okay, so much so for the workspace and what we all find in there and what files we are basically working with. And I also already mentioned that ODK allows for modularization. And this is something that's very useful for us because, for example, in the case of NFDI core, there are many developers involved, and it's nice to separate these modules. And this modular architecture, allows to have this clean separation of the layers, and as I said, supports this collaborative editing and also simplifies really the maintenance here. Here's a brief overview of how this is used in NFDI core, but of course in other ontologies this can also be used differently. So what this means is on the left here we have the ontologies that we import, and our first module here is this import edit owl, and this contains all of the ontology parts that extend the definitions of the elements defined in this imported ontologies. And what this does is it prevents us from manual editing this these automatically generated import modules. This is then imported by the NFDI core main owl file, and this contains really the core content of our clean BFO compliant modeling in NFDI core. And this is imported by NFDI core extension. And here we provide extensions for simplifications. This can be, for example, shortcuts that we create. Then this I already talked about, the edit owl, and this is this editable ontology file that imports main extension and all of the imports, and this is the one that we use directly in Protege. And then finally the one that we ship, the release ontology file that combines all of these components and is used for public release in the end. Okay. And the next part that I would go into is the ontology import, because I find it not so straightforward if you want to have a more custom solution to that. It involves quite a few steps, which starts and ends with this YAML file that we already got to know. In this YAML file, we declare our import. For example, as we do that in the import group. And as I said, for the OBO-based ontology, the ID is sufficient. But in this case, this is in the culture ontology, and we import here, for example, NFDI core and schema. And for this, we need the actual locations. And the next question is, what do we want to import? Or how do we want to import it? Do we want to import a subset? Or what is the method that we want to use here? Do we want to preserve the logical entailments and so on? And this is very well documented here in this resource provided by Robot. There you can also see what all of these mean and how this actually works in Robot. I won't go into this now in detail. In this case, we decided to completely mirror NFDI core, and for schema, what is set here is a subset, and we are excluding the individuals. The next step to continue this customized import is, as I said, to check the global makefile to see if this declaration of this import actually worked, and we can see that this import NFDI core import OWL file was created. The next part is that we have to go into the terms txt. In this, here we are in ontology imports, and we're importing the IAO ontology here in this screenshot. So this is the IAO terms txt. And here we list the full IRIs of the terms that we want to import into into this, and then we refresh the imports. And the next step is that we import this, that we copy this import URI into our main editing file, the edit OWL and the catalog XML. We want to say here, for example, protégé, please use this this specific version of this imported ontology. And then we have to go back to our makefile, in this case, for example, the CTO makefile or NFDI core makefile, and copy this generated import schema that we already found in the global makefile, and we copy that from the global makefile to the specific ontology makefile. And last but not least, we can go back to our ODK YAML file to determine that we use the custom import of specific terms and their axioms. And then when we open Protégé, we can also see that NFDI core was successfully imported, as well as schema. This is kind of how it works. It sounds very complicated, but once you get a hang of it and went through the cycle once, it's actually quite straightforward. Exactly. And I think I've used up all of my time, and I came to the end of this presentation. What's missing here is that ODK has received an update or has released an update recently. That means a few of these things changed, and of course, when you start working with ODK now, then you will work with a 1.6. So some of the commands here changed and some other things, but the general principle is the same. Exactly. And so some of the conclusions, I come from the culture community, and I'm not a software developer at heart. So for me, the learning curve with ODK was quite steep, but I really value these automation processes, the reproducibility, and the way how we are forced to really work with the best practices here. I really value that, and would use ODK basically for every ontology development project that we have, even from the culture background where we don't usually work with OBO ontologies. Exactly. And here are also some resources. For example, the talk that Philip already gave, that's also available on YouTube, but with also another ODK version, I think, and some other versions as well. I can also happily provide the slides. And that's it, exactly.